Hello, my name is Gabriel Holland, and for this Google slide presentation, my research question that I decided to focus on was the effects of nicotine on physical activity and whether or not there are any benefits or downsides in taking the drug while someone is trying to be more physically active. I find this research question to be significant in today's society here in the US because, as stated by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, there was a study done in 2021 where it was recorded that among people aged 12 years old or older, about 22% of Americans, which estimated to about 61.6 million people, have reported using tobacco products or vaping nicotine products in the past 30 days. I personally consume nicotine through nicotine pouches, and I take these pouches quite often throughout the week, and I'm at a point where I can't even remember how frequently I buy more whenever I'm out. As someone who takes my physical activity somewhat seriously, I'm curious to learn whether or not consuming nicotine has any benefits or setbacks whenever I work out at the gym. In the research article titled Nicotine, Sporting Friend or Foe, a review of athlete use, performance consequences, and other considerations, written by Toby Mundell, goes into great detail on the effects of nicotine on physical performance among athletes. Nicotine use among athletes is high and increasing, and it's most popular within the elite and professional athlete environment, with most documented abuse coming in baseball, ice hockey, and other strength-based sports. In the article, Toby Mundell reviews previous studies done on nicotine effects on physical performance and compares the results to draw a conclusion. In the studies done that focuses on the impact of nicotine on muscular strength and power, it was documented that college athletes who consumed nicotine had low leg extensor force and rate of force development than participants who didn't consume nicotine. In another article that focuses on muscular strength and power among footballers, half of the participants took a smokeless tobacco product, while the other half took a placebo. And in this article, there wasn't much difference between the two groups regarding physical performance. In the studies that focused on the effects of nicotine on high-intensity exercise, two groups were observed, with one taking a placebo and the other half taking 4 milligrams of nicotine gum. In this study, it was also discovered that there were no difference between either of the two groups. The conclusion of this article admits that the question of nicotine affecting physical performance is still a shaky subject, and that more research should be conducted to find more answers. The second research article is titled Effect of Transdermal Nicotine Administration on Exercise Endurance in Men, and Toby Mundell and David A. Jones wrote it. This article aimed to determine nicotine's effects on cycling endurance, perception of exertion, and a range of psychological variables. The participants for this research study followed 12 healthy males who were all non-smokers, familiar with the intensity of cycling, and completed a school's general health questionnaire. All studies were done on an electrically braked cycle ergometer, and participants were required to come to 4 visits to the research lab so that experiments could be conducted. The first visit was an incremental exercise test to determine VO2 max, maximal aerobic power output, and maximal heart rate among the participants. The second visit served to familiarize subjects with the protocol and equipment for the experiment to minimize potential mistakes. The last 2 visits had subjects wear a 7 milligram nicotine patch or a placebo. The study was carried out in a randomized fashion with subjects not knowing the purpose of the study. The trial done to test extra times found that nicotine did not affect the ratings of perceived exertion. In the trials that recorded cardiovascular and respiratory responses, nicotine had no effect compared to placebo. There were no differences in any of the respiratory variables, which suggests that the energy consumption, gross efficiency, and relative rates of fuel oxidation were not altered by nicotine. This article was able to conclude that nicotine's administration during moderate intensity exercise delays fatigue and significantly lengthens the time to exhaustion. The effects of nicotine on physical activity were compared to caffeine and the stimulating effects it has on the body and mind. The third article, titled Nicotine Effects on Exercise Performance and Physiological Responses in Nicotine-Naive Individuals, a systemic review written by Robert Johnston, Melissa Crow, and Kenji Doma, had a lot to say about the effects of nicotine on the human body. In this article, the purpose of the experiments was to evaluate the impact of smokeless forms of nicotine on physiological responses and exercise performance. What I found most interesting in this article was how nicotine was proved to significantly improve exercise performance with endurance-based parameters. Anaerobic parameters were unaffected with nicotine compared to placebo, except in one study, which reported enhanced leg extensor torque but no effect on counter-movement jump or ring gait anaerobic capacity. Nicotine increases heart rate, blood pressure, and blood flow, Still, while it can influence physiological factors that can boost physical performance, beneficial effects have only been shown in leg extensor torque and endurance performance. This article concludes by stating that there needs to be more research done to find out more about nicotine's potential effects on physical performance. In the article, Acute Effects of Nicotine on Physiological Responses in Sport Performance in Healthy Baseball Players, this study aimed to determine whether nicotine could enhance the attention to sporting performance among baseball players. Observational studies examined whether nicotine gum chewed before exercise could provide acute effects on physiological responses and sport performance. Things such as heart rate variability, saliva concentration, amylase activity, cognitive function, muscle strength, and baseball hitting performance were measured in the experiments. Participants for the experiment consisted of 13 healthy, non smoking baseball players. The 13 participants were split up in two groups, one of which chewed nicotine gum. In contrast, the other group chewed placebo gum for 30 minutes before doing any physical activity. Heart rate variability and saliva analysis were conducted before and after gum consumption and test completion. Cognitive muscle strength and baseball hitting performance tests were performed after nicotine or placebo chewing gum. The studies found significant changes in heart rate variability, amylase, testosterone, and cortisol in the nicotine group after chewing the gum and after test completion. The nicotine group exhibited enhanced motor reaction times, cognitive function, and baseball hitting performance compared to the placebo group. This experiment concluded that nicotine could induce changes in the endocrine sympathetic nerve activity and improve cognitive function and baseball hitting performance. Still, there's no evidence that nicotine could potentially increase muscle strength. The last article I looked into was titled Nicotine Supplementation Enhances Stimulated Game Performance of Archery Athletes. This article aimed to discover nicotine supplementation's effects on cognitive abilities, heart rate variability, and sport performance of professional archers. Participants for this experiment included 11 college archers, and each was given 2 milligrams of nicotine supplementation or placebo before experiments could be conducted. Tests were performed after 30 minutes of ingesting nicotine. The results of the experiment found that the group that took nicotine was able to complete the grooved pegboard test faster than the placebo group. Motor reaction times were recorded not to be different between the two groups, and saliva amylase activity was significantly lower after nicotine supplementation, but increased after the archery test. The nicotine group had increased heart rate variability and archery scores compared to the placebo group. Ultimately, the article concluded that nicotine enhances archery athletes' performance by improving cognitive function and stimulating the sympathetic adrenergic system. The research articles I reviewed have helped me answer my quick curiosity about nicotine's benefits to our physical health. Nicotine can be beneficial to someone's physical activity in the case it's taken in a non-smoking form and is at a low dosage, such as 2 to 4 milligrams. One thing I could not help but notice was although the professors who conducted the experiments were able to find the benefits of nicotine in their sense, such as having increased motor reaction time, increased blood flow, boosting endurance, etc., many of the articles I reviewed, however, contradicted one another. For example, in the article that tested the effects of nicotine among baseball players, it was found that nicotine can boost motor reaction time. Still, in the article that tested the effects of nicotine on archers, there was no difference in motor reaction time between the nicotine group versus the placebo group. I saw this as a familiar pattern as I was doing my project, but despite this, there is one thing they had in common to say. In all the research articles, in their conclusions, they always stated that the studies done on nicotine's effects on physical health need to be studied more. Since this question hasn't been thoroughly studied, many of the findings from the articles have to be taken with a bit of a bias. With this information, I want to conclude my presentation by stating my question was somewhat answered, yet I admit it remains a vague question that must be answered thoroughly and studied more often. Thank you so much, and here are my references.